Welcome to Muddy River News this week. I'm Bob Gough. Lewis Riggs has represented Marion County and other counties, depending on how they're redistricted, since 2018 in the Missouri House of Representatives, and he's my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you.
You now represent my home county of Rawls.
I do.
And again, whether it's going to be Shelby, Monroe, Rawls, every 10 years they shift it around. It really doesn't matter much, does it?
For folks out rural, not so much. I do miss not going to Bethel and eating German food as much as I did. What I like about Rawls is, from a connectivity standpoint, the first county in the state of Missouri to actually get every resident who wanted it broadband fiber to the home, which is amazing. Every county should be so lucky, but at the same time it was a 14-year process. And they've done it to perfection. So that's a really nice luxury to have.
And a lot of people don't realize this, but there's a pretty good chunk of Hannibal, mostly kind of the industrial park area, including General Mills. That's actually in Rawls County.
Village of Rawls.
So yeah, it's it's a good fit for you. How was the past legislative session? Did you consider it productive?
Not really.
I get that from both sides of the state. Go figure. Why not?
Well, when you've got basically 6 people on one side of the building, the Senate, who have their own agenda, and they don't caucus with the other people in their party. They do their own thing. Because the Senate does not discipline its own, it has something called the PQ, which, think of the scene in Indiana Jones, the first one, where they open up the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
All these eyeballs explode and melt. That's the way they treat the PQ. It's like, Voldemort on steroids. So they just won't get to that point. Or several times this year, I thought maybe they don't do it. So they basically, Cindy O'Laughlin described it as 34 presidents.
Yeah.
They can do what they want as long as they want, to the detriment of everybody else. So I think we passed a grand total of 10 non-budget bills this year. Some were okay, some were like, what are we doing? But at the end of the day, when you file between the two chambers, better part of 2,000 bills, and people have spent 5 months nurturing their bills in a process, and you don't have a lot to show for it, that's really disappointing.
Yeah, I'm all for limited government, but government still has to function. That's the difference.
Amen.
Again, I look at things, and you seem to have a class of politicians, and again, this is at every level, state, federal, a lot of times at the local level. Well, it's just like, okay, our function is to make sure nothing gets done. But at some point, government has to perform some basic services. And especially in the state, when you're dealing with education and child welfare and things like that, some of those things are very important. And of course, transportation and roads, the biggest thing a lot of us around here are concerned about. I know, and speaking of transportation, one of the things you've been working on diligently has been the Hannibal Bypass project. How's that coming along?
Much better than it was.
Good.
And that's something where I was able to obtain $2 million for construction this budget cycle. Hopefully that stays intact. We'll know here very soon. The new budget year begins July 1st, so we're expecting good news or bad news depending on which side of the divide you land on. But that is something where we finally got a number from MoDOT, right at $130 million. It's been a multi-year process to get to this point. And it was, I believe 1996 was the last time they had any real movement on this. So I ran for this in 2018. My Democrat opponent ran in 2018. We both agreed on a lot of issues. That was the signal issue. We both agreed. I was like, we got to have this. And when you've got 4,200 trucks a day running up the middle of Hannibal on McMaster's, where you have no shoulders, emergency vehicles are basically stressed to get from one end of town to the other. You got hazmat trucks running in front of Hannibal Middle School and the high school, 100, 150 yards from the thoroughfare, going through a red light where people are known to not stop. One of my worst fears is that cloud of hydro something that is going to escape from one of these hazmat trucks that rolls over and is going to kill some of our kids. Nobody wants that. So it's an expense, I get it. There are some folks who think it's going to kill their businesses. It won't. I look at what happened here with I-172, and basically Quincy picked up and moved east. Yeah. Hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. We anticipate the same thing, north-south.
Hannibal's already moving west, though.
It already is.
I mean, so, and I'm not, where is when you're talking about the bypass and moving it west, where again is it supposed to run?
Probably jump off south at Route M,
Okay.
a couple miles south of Hannibal, and the route that makes the most sense and is the least costly is to join up at the 24 intersection, i.e. the Rocket.
Sure.
Intersection's built already. There's another path that, well, you could take it out by Withers Mill. There's an overpass. But the construction, that route was basically laid out in 1996. In order to deviate from that, it's a multi-year process. We don't have multiple years. No. So I think that's where the money's going to go. I think that's where the equities lie. At the same time, the city of Hannibal is looking at ways to annex out to touch the bypass, which would be smart. So there are a lot of things that need to happen, but at the same time, it just takes money. So
and when the hospital moved out there, that was the thing that planted the flag to say, look, the city is eventually going to come this way. Obviously, you can't go east, but when it comes to north and south, when you're bordered by Rawls to the south, and the city could expand there, but still, it just makes the most sense just to go out closer toward the hospital.
It does, and I think from the environmental standpoint, you're crossing a Class 1 railroad track. You've got the Bear Creek Reservoir to deal with. I mean, the route they've staked out makes perfect sense economically as well as environmentally. So that helps with the cost containment as well. So I think that's the way we're going to go.
When you're talking about those types of issues, and again, trying to, when you work with your colleagues in the House, everybody needs to sit there and realize, look, we're all going to have our projects. We're all going to have things we need. And for you to get that sort of agreement on that, it is a pretty major accomplishment because it's taken a long time. But then, like you said, then you've got to still see what can get through the House. And right now, as you said earlier, it just doesn't seem like much gets through the House for political reasons.
Yeah. Well, the House is sort of the well-oiled machine. The Senate is where things go to die or be slow-walked or whatever. So I look at, the side of infrastructure, and to me, those are the smartest investments we can make. Everybody benefits from those. We have spent now, if the government goes ahead and approves the $700 million-ish for I-44, it'll be over $3.5 billion between I-70 and I-44. Can you name the only area of the state of Missouri that has zero interstate access?
It would be us.
That would be us. So as I watch this money being shoveled out to other areas, it really irritates me. So I'm committed to getting more as much as we possibly can. We left $1.5 billion on the bottom line, basically didn't touch it this year. We decreased our budget substantially, for good or for not. But at the end of the day, these are the types of investments in us that we need to be making a lot more of. So I'm termed out in the House in 2 years. My plan is to run for the Senate to keep the ball rolling. I want to finish what I started with broadband internet, 28 into 30 probably. But also we have work to do with I-72 in two parts. The first is to get that designation out the 24 junction, similar to what you do with I-172 over here. Second is all the way across the entire state. Grand total of that would be right at $2 billion, less than we spent on I-70 already. So it's doable.
Yeah, I-70 is something, though, that's always going to be the, obviously the way it connects with St. Louis, Kansas City, of course, going right by Columbia. It's always going to get a little special treatment. But again, that road is something, whether you talk about trying to expand it to lanes or whatever, still getting designation and making this 72 all the way across, it just has tremendous benefits. And again, it won't cost as much as 70.
No, not anywhere close. And the percentage of it's already been built. When you look at the 8-mile stretch from the river to the west from us, another 8 miles-ish. From the Missouri River east from St. Joe, around 8 miles, Callio, making a Callio. 2-3 miles here and there along the route, Monroe City, Brookfield, Marceline. Stuff adds up.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we've looked at a process that would take existing right-of-way, use that for the lanes as opposed to additional right-of-way costs. Really efficient, put your barrier all up just like they do on I-64 in St. Louis from basically the river out to Darden Prairie. There you go. You've got a ball game. But you look at the distances, and these are MoDOT numbers, not mine.
Sure.
It's closer from Chicago to Kansas City on 36. It's actually a little bit quicker than going down 70, but they put 40,000 trucks a day through St. Louis going to Kansas City. It's like, why are we doing this? And each one of those trucks represents 3 car lengths. So it's better for St. Louis congestion-wise. It's better for them. They don't need the additional whatever air quality, complications from trucks. So we'll take your trucks. We'll do a great job with it. We've got 10 communities along the route who can service you, do whatever you need. It's not just Bevere with the truck stop. We could have them just about everywhere.
Yeah, no, and then they were sort of, like I said, it's sort of an, if you build it, they will come. The more traffic comes, the more stops you're going to get that are going to pop up there. So, another project that is sort of starting to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit is the Hannibal School District's project with the development center, the old Sunderland's building, for the tech classes and things like that. That's been something I know you've been a part of, but with that project, that seems like something in terms of education. We got fewer kids going to college these days. So with that, the Hannibal Votech's been in that little building forever. This sort of expansion's got to mean great things for those kind of numbers, and also for those kids to get the skills that they really need for those kids, fewer and fewer of which who are going to college these days.
Yeah, and the numbers basically are worse than that. So Missouri has seen a decrease in overall enrollment since 2018. Part of that is the kids were never born. The recession, 07, 08, 09, a lot of these kids never saw light because they weren't born. So we've looked at a steady decrease. Our demographic cliff, as they call it in higher education, is upon us, and that's going to be another 5 to 10 years. The kids just aren't there. So a lot of your 4-year colleges are going to close, the smaller ones, typically in the Midwest and Northeast, because we've got a lot of them. But at the same time, it's 88,000 square feet. I was able to get the money for that back in 22 into 23. They're going ahead with plans to put a whole bunch of different stuff in there, including a couple new additions. The one I'm really excited about is the partnership with the Hannibal Regional Hospital, so we can create our own workforce pipelines for nursing. Yeah. CNAs, all of that, nursing homes, hospitals. The cost structure for these folks has exploded with traveling nurses. COVID accelerated a process that was already awful. And if it hadn't been for the cost structure, we could have had probably a 20-bed facility, mental health beds, in Hannibal already. The money just simply isn't there because we're spending it on nurses and staff, because the hospital's 24/7, 365, 366 in leap year. No easy way around that. So when we develop our own, we can do everything for you in terms of healthcare, education in Hannibal, except send you to med school.
And you talked about the small 4 years. Now your undergrad was at Westminster, right?
Yes.
And Hannibal LaGrange in our own backyard, and over on this side of the river. It's the same thing. Those colleges really need to. They're going to have to retool, or a lot of them aren't just going to be there anyway. And the money that's already going to the public schools, those private schools, their endowments are drying up. Their alumni base is drying up. I just don't see any way for them to survive unless they make some radical changes.
And a lot of them are making radical changes, still isn't doing any good, because frankly the enrollment numbers aren't there. And Fontbonne is the latest to close in St. Louis. Well, if you can't make it work in St. Louis, that's a bad sign.
And Lindenwood's struggling down there too. And it's they made a lot of changes, and they did a lot of expansion. They went to D1 in sports, which is always kind of good luck with that. But it's not paying off for them either. They just did a 10% across the board reduction. And
the numbers just frankly, the students weren't born, the kids aren't there, and the next generation of students that are showing an increase are in America's Southwest. They're not going to leave California, Arizona, or Texas. Yeah. And that's where the growth has been. That isn't us. And the Midwest has seen a nosedive the last 3 or 4 years. That's going to accelerate in the next 5.
Last thing to chat about, we do have a primary coming up. We have a governor's race that seems hotly contested. Got a dog in the fight?
I do. I think Lieutenant Governor Kehoe is my personal favorite, just based on my dealings with him. And frankly, I'm not going to say anything bad about anybody else, except Bill Eigel.
When you mentioned the Senate earlier.
Yeah, it's Eigel has been sort of the quarterback of the Chaos Caucus in the Senate.
Yeah.
I don't think he brings a whole lot to the conversation except raising his voice. Mm-hmm. Kehoe, from my standpoint, I've dealt with him extensively. I had a problem last year with an agency that needed to be, shall I say, dealt with. I filed a piece of legislation to take that out of one department, and my proposal was to laying it with the lieutenant governor. And the two-word response I got was bring it. They weren't, to say it wasn't being run in the most effective manner possible. His background is in business. He understands how the world works. He's signed both sides of a paycheck. He knows what he's doing. And he told me stories I hadn't heard yet about that program, and I've been around it for 10 years. And it's like, how'd you know that? Well, because I talked to so-and-so. Like, oh. So for me, he has that reach. He's somebody who was born and raised in North St. Louis City, but he gets rural like nobody else because he's first generation farming. And he means his stuff. He tells you he's going to do something, he does it. He's a serious individual. At the same time, he's a really good listener. I don't get that a whole lot in Jefferson City, but having dealt with him as extensive as I have, I think he's the one that we need to keep on moving this state forward. And I'm going to miss Governor Parson. He's the most rural governor of my lifetime. He's been a great partner to have with our broadband conversation. He's had my back from day one. Actually, before day one, he's lieutenant governor. I started this journey before I was in the House of Representatives. Yeah. So I think to keep the ball rolling, and we need somebody like Kehoe with those skills. Yeah, and of course, Governor Parson, the sort of an accidental governor, if you will, because of everything that happened with former Governor Greitens, and he just stepped in, and again, he's a guy who just his background is the background you want for a rural, for the CEO, chief legislator, whatever you want to call him, in a rural state, chief executive. He gets it. He'd been in the House, he'd been in the Senate, he'd been lieutenant governor, basically every strata he dealt with. Before they'd been a county sheriff. Sheriff, yeah. Well, who hears more stories than a sheriff? No one. Maybe a teacher, but I think he has, discernment. He's got the right attitude. He has the right demeanor. Another really good listener. But I've talked to people from his hometown and said, is he different? Like, no. He's the same guy now he was when he was sheriff of Polk County. He hasn't changed a bit, and neither is the First Lady. They're a team. They're wonderful folks. I'm really going to miss them both. Well, good luck on you working your magic to try to help your candidate in the primary, and we will certainly talk again before the next legislative session, and thanks for stopping by. All right, well, appreciate the visit, and thank you for what you guys do. Thanks. That's all the time we have for now. I'm Bob Gough. Have a great week.